My name is Ethan. I am 35 years old, and what I'm about to tell you is not a story I ever thought I'd share. It still feels too raw, too unbelievable even now. But some moments in life are so utterly, spectacularly out of left field that they demand to be spoken, to be wrestled with in the quiet chambers of your own mind, until they take on a semblance of reality. This is one of those moments. It happened just a few weeks ago on a Tuesday morning, in a sterile, wood-paneled office that smelled faintly of old paper and stale coffee, the kind of place where life-altering decisions are announced with the same monotonous drone as a grocery list. We were there for the reading of Uncle Richard's will. He was a notoriously eccentric, wealthy bachelor, the kind of man who bought entire islands on a whim and then forgot he owned them. His passing, while sad, had unleashed a silent, almost palpable tension among the assembled relatives. Cousins I hadn't seen in years, aunts and uncles whose faces were now etched with lines of greed rather than grief, all sat stiffly, eyeing each other with suspicion. A hushed anticipation filled the air, thick and oppressive, broken only by the nervous cough of an elderly cousin or the rustle of a silk scarf. I sat beside Sarah, my wife of 7 years. Or, what I thought was my wife of 7 years. My hand rested on her knee, a gesture of quiet support, though I felt a strange distance between us, a chasm that had slowly, imperceptibly, grown over the last few months. Her gaze was fixed on the mahogany door across the room, an almost unnatural stillness in her usually vibrant eyes. She wore a simple black dress, elegant and understated, but beneath the fabric, I could sense a restlessness, a tremor that had nothing to do with the cool air conditioning. "Nervous?" I whispered, leaning closer. Her shoulder, usually so welcoming, felt rigid against mine. She didn't turn to me. "Just eager for this to be over, Ethan. This whole thing feels morbid." Her voice was low, almost a murmur, and I noticed a slight tremor in her hand as she adjusted a stray strand of hair. A pang of something I couldn't quite name went through me. Was it just the solemnity of the occasion, or was there something else stirring beneath her calm facade? The lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a man whose glasses seemed permanently fogged with legal jargon, cleared his throat from behind the large desk. He began to speak, his voice a monotonous hum, detailing the various clauses and beneficiaries. My mind drifted, half listening, half observing the vultures around me. Then, the heavy oak door creaked open, disrupting the solemn proceedings. Every head in the room snapped toward the sound, and there she was. Sarah. But not just Sarah. She stood in the doorway, framed by the bright hallway lights, her arm linked, possessively, with another man. My stomach dropped like a stone through endless water. My Sarah. With him. The world tilted sideways, a grotesque carnival ride of betrayal and disbelief. My breath caught, a physical obstruction. For a long, agonizing moment I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. All I could do was stare at Sarah, who stood there, not with remorse, but with a strange, defiant tilt to her chin. Beside her, his arm linked possessively, was a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, with dark, slicked-back hair and a custom-tailored suit that screamed old money. His eyes, cold and assessing, swept the room, lingering on me before he offered a smug, almost pitying half-smile. A smile that said, "Yes, it's true, and now you know." The air in the room, thick with greed, suddenly charged with something far more potent: scandal. Gasps rippled through the relatives, hushed whispers like a frantic buzzing in my ears. My gaze snapped back to Sarah. Her eyes, those beautiful, familiar eyes, met mine for an instant. In them, I saw a flicker of something unreadable, defiance or perhaps fear. Then she averted her gaze, her grip tightening on the man's arm. "Mr. Thompson," the lawyer cleared his throat, a sharp, nervous sound that cut through the silence. He looked from the doorway to me, his brow furrowed with discomfort. This wasn't in his legal script. "Sarah?" My own voice, a reedy, unfamiliar croak, barely audible above the pounding in my ears. It was a question, an accusation, a plea. The man beside her squeezed her arm, his lips brushing her temple in a gesture so intimate, so possessive, it felt like a punch to my gut. The image branded itself onto my retina, burning with the heat of 1,000 suns. This was real. This wasn't a nightmare. This was my life, fracturing before my very eyes. Then, Sarah finally spoke, her voice surprisingly steady, though tinged with an unfamiliar edge. "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you." The words felt rehearsed, chosen for maximum impact. The room felt like it was closing in, the wood paneling pressing, the stale coffee smell turning nauseating. My mind raced, grasping for any logical explanation, any shred of sanity, but there was none. Just the cold, hard reality of her betrayal, standing there, bold and undeniable, for all our family to witness. "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you." The words echoed, yet the truth in them felt muted, almost unreal. My own Sarah. The woman I'd shared my life with for 7 years, standing there, bold as brass, with another man, announcing her confession as if it were a casual dinner reservation. The air, already thick with the scent of old paper and suppressed avarice, now tasted of ash and bitter betrayal. My vision swam, the ornate patterns on the ceiling swirling like a malevolent galaxy. I could feel the eyes of every single relative in the room boring into me, a collective gaze of pity, shock, and thinly veiled schadenfreude. "Something you need to tell me?" I managed to articulate, the words scraping my throat like gravel. I tried to rise, to confront her, but my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot. The other man, who hadn't released her arm, shifted his weight, a subtle, possessive movement that spoke volumes. He even had the audacity to offer me a tight, knowing smirk, a silent taunt that made my blood run cold. It was the smirk of a victor, of someone who had played a game and won, and my stomach churned with a mixture of rage and profound nausea. Sarah finally met my gaze, a flash of something unreadable in her eyes. Was it guilt, or just resolve? "Ethan, this is Mark." She gestured vaguely to the man beside her. "We've been together for a while now." The pronouncement hung in the air, a bell tolling the death of everything I thought I knew. A collective gasp rippled through the room, louder this time, punctuated by the clatter of a teacup hitting a saucer in Aunt Carol's trembling hand. The lawyer, Mr. Thompson, looked utterly bewildered, his eyes darting between Sarah, Mark, and me, his meticulously arranged papers suddenly seeming irrelevant. "Together?" My voice was a choked whisper, barely audible over the sudden, agitated murmurings of the family. "What are you talking about, Sarah? What is this?" I pushed myself to my feet, the chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, a harsh sound in the stunned silence that followed my outburst. My hands clenched into fists, the knuckles white against my tanned skin. Every nerve ending in my body was screaming, but a strange, icy calm was also settling over me, a terrifying self-preservation mechanism. Mark, the man who was apparently Mark, stepped slightly forward, his grip still firm on Sarah's arm. "She means we're in love, old man," he said, his voice smooth, dripping with condescension. He looked directly at me, his eyes devoid of any warmth, only a cold, calculating assessment. "And she's choosing to be with me." The arrogance in his tone was unbearable, a direct affront to my very existence. How dare he speak to me like that, in my own family's presence, about my wife? Sarah flinched slightly at his words, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she took a deep breath. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you." Her voice, though still steady, carried a fragile tremor now. "This isn't easy for me either, believe me. But Mark and we have a connection. Something I haven't felt in a very long time." She avoided my eyes, her gaze fixed on a point just past my shoulder, as if she couldn't bear to witness the destruction she was wreaking. "A connection?" My laugh was a bitter, broken sound. "We have a life, Sarah, a home, a shared history. 7 years, do they mean nothing to you?" The questions tumbled out, raw and unfiltered, each one a desperate plea for understanding, for a shred of the woman I thought I knew to re-emerge from behind this cold, unfamiliar facade. The family was now openly staring, their whispers hushed, but their gazes loud with judgment and morbid curiosity. This wasn't just a reading of a will anymore. It was a public execution of my marriage. "Mr. Thompson, sensing the complete derailment of his professional duties, interjected, his voice strained. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess, everyone. This is clearly a sensitive matter that requires private discussion." He gestured vaguely towards the door, his face a mask of discomfort and professionalism stretched to its breaking point. But Sarah shook her head, a defiant tilt to her chin that echoed the earlier one. "No, Mr. Thompson," she stated, her voice firmer now, regaining its composure. "It's time for everything to be out in the open. Ethan deserves to know the truth." She turned back to me, her eyes, though still guarded, finally holding my gaze. "This isn't about Uncle Richard's will, Ethan. This is about our life. And my choice." The weight of those last two words, my choice, landed like a hammer blow, shattering any lingering fragments of hope within me. The air around me solidified, heavy and suffocating. Her words, my choice, resonated in the sudden, charged silence, echoing not in my ears, but directly in the hollow space where my heart used to be. My gaze, raw and pleading, searched Sarah's face for any hint of the woman I loved, any glimmer of the shared history she had so casually discarded. But her expression remained a blend of defiance and a strained sort of resolve, a mask I didn't recognize. Mark, beside her, seemed to grow taller, his presence expanding, a smug, dark shadow consuming the light in the room. He tightened his arm around Sarah, a silent, sickening declaration of his claim. I could hear the whispers now, a frantic, hushed chorus among the relatives, a symphony of judgment and morbid fascination. "Your choice, Sarah?" My voice was barely a rasp, stripped bare of all strength. "After 7 years, after everything we built, this is how you tell me? Here? Now?" Each word was a splinter, tearing through my own fragile composure. My hands, still clenched, trembled with a violence I couldn't control. My eyes burned, but no tears came, only a dry, searing heat that mirrored the inferno raging inside me. Aunt Carol, usually so demure, let out a small, choked sob, covering her mouth with a lace-edged handkerchief. Even Mr. Thompson, the seasoned lawyer, seemed utterly lost, his face a roadmap of escalating panic. Sarah finally dropped her gaze from mine, her eyes fluttering for a moment to Mark, then back to the scuffed Persian rug underfoot. "Ethan, I know this is hard. Believe me, it's not how I wanted it to happen." Her voice softened, a slight tremor finally breaking through, but it was too little, too late. But there was no easy way. "And Uncle Richard's will reading. It just happened to be the day everything finally came to a head." Her logic was a twisted knot of evasions, an insult masquerading as an explanation. I felt a surge of pure, blinding anger, hot and sharp, momentarily eclipsing the crushing pain. "Came to a head?" I spat the words, oblivious to the horrified gasps from my cousins. "You mean this convenient public spectacle? This parade of your betrayal? You think this makes it easier, Sarah? For me? For anyone?" My voice cracked, raw with emotion. The wood-paneled walls, usually so imposing, felt like they were closing in, mocking my vulnerability. I could taste bile in the back of my throat, bitter and acrid, mirroring the taste of her deception. Mark, sensing my unraveling, decided to chime in, his voice cutting through the heavy air like a razor. "Look, Ethan, you're making a scene." Mark interjected, his tone laced with a sickening blend of false sympathy and barely concealed triumph. He stepped closer to Sarah, subtly positioning himself as her protector. "Sarah has been unhappy for a long time. She deserves to be happy. We both do." He even had the audacity to place a hand gently on her lower back, a gesture that screamed intimacy and ownership. My blood ran cold, then boiled with a furious heat. Unhappy. Was this what our life had been? A performance of unhappiness unseen by me but meticulously planned by her. Sarah looked up at Mark, a quick, almost imperceptible glance that was undeniably affectionate, a silent affirmation of his words. It was a glance meant for him, not for me. Yet it struck me harder than any punch. That small, private moment, shared between them in my presence, felt like the final nail in the coffin of my illusion. My mind reeled, trying to grasp the timeline, the moments I must have missed, the subtle shifts I had dismissed as everyday marital ebb and flow. How long had this been going on? How many times had she looked at him like that, while I lay beside her, oblivious? Unhappy? I repeated, my voice now a dangerous whisper, devoid of its earlier pleading. You never said a word, Sarah, not a single word. We talked, we planned, we dreamed. Was it all a lie? My gaze swept across the room, catching the eyes of my Aunt Mildred, whose face was a mixture of genuine sadness and morbid curiosity. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the nervous shuffle of feet and the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the air conditioning. This wasn't just my private grief anymore. It was a public dissection. Sarah finally pulled her hand away from Mark's, a slight, almost imperceptible movement, but one that caught my attention. It's not that simple, Ethan. Emotions are complicated. We grew apart, that's all. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, yet firm. Mark. He showed me what I was missing. A different kind of connection, a different kind of life. Her words felt like a carefully crafted script, devoid of the raw, messy truth. I remembered countless nights spent talking, laughing, planning our future, a future that now seemed to have been a complete fabrication. A different kind of life? I echoed, my voice hoarse. What about our life, Sarah? What about the promises we made? My chest felt tight, constricted, as if an invisible vice were squeezing the air from my lungs. The scent of stale coffee and old paper was replaced by the acrid tang of betrayal. I looked at Mark, this stranger who had so casually walked into my world and detonated it. He simply stood there, a faint, unreadable smile playing on his lips, as if savoring my agony. The room, once a place of somber anticipation for a will, had become a crucible of shattered love. Mr. Thompson, finally finding his voice, albeit a shaky one, attempted to regain control. Perhaps we could truly adjourn. This is highly irregular. We can reconvene at a later date, when things are calmer. He looked desperately from me to Sarah, his meticulously organized legal papers now scattered across his desk, mirroring the disarray of my own life. But the drama had a gravitational pull, holding everyone wrapped and no one moved. The will, the inheritance, all of it faded into insignificance before the raw, public spectacle of my crumbling marriage. The lawyer's plea for a recess hung in the air, unheard, drowned out by the thrum of disbelief in my own ears. Sarah, oblivious or uncaring of Mr. Thompson's discomfort, remained rooted beside Mark, her hand still resting in his. The faint hum of the air conditioning was the only consistent sound, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of my unraveling world. Every relative, previously focused on potential inheritances, was now locked into this grotesque theater, their faces a mix of shock, pity, and a very human, very ugly curiosity. So that's it then? I finally managed, my voice sharp, cutting through the heavy silence like a shard of glass. I gestured broadly between Sarah and Mark, the movement encompassing their shared, secret world. After 7 years, after promises and dreams, after building a life brick by brick, you just walk away? With him? The accusation hung in the air, a venomous question directed solely at her. My gaze was fixed on Sarah, pleading with her to deny it, to somehow make sense of this insanity. Sarah flinched, her eyes dropping from mine to Mark's face, then quickly back to me, a desperate flicker of pain visible beneath her carefully constructed composure. "Ethan, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It's not that simple. Emotions are complicated. You wouldn't understand." Her words were like a fresh stab, implying my inability to grasp the profound intricacies of her infidelity, as if betrayal was a nuanced art form. My jaw tightened, my hands clenching further into useless fists. "Complicated?" I scoffed, the sound raw and humorless. "What's complicated, Sarah, is lying to someone for months, maybe years, sharing a bed, a life, and then parading your lover in front of your family at a will reading. That's not complicated. That's cruel." My voice rose, betraying the icy calm I'd tried to maintain. Aunt Carol gasped again, a small, choked sound. Even Aunt Mildred looked away, as if unable to bear the intensity of my anguish. Mark, ever the opportunist, decided to chime in, his voice annoyingly smooth. "Look, Ethan, you're just making this harder for everyone. Sarah has explained. She found happiness. You should respect that." His condescending tone, combined with the patronizing advice, pushed me to the edge. He stepped even closer to Sarah, possessively, as if to shield her from my justifiable rage. The sheer audacity of his presence, his casual intrusion into the most intimate corner of my life, was infuriating. "Respect that?" I spun towards Mark, my vision momentarily blurring. "Respect you? You who clearly has no respect for anything. You sneak into a man's life, you corrupt his marriage, and you have the gall to talk about respect? Get out of here, Mark. Get out of my sight." My voice was a roar now, unbridled fury finally breaking through the dam of my restraint. The air crackled with the raw energy of my anger, silencing even the most avid gossips among the relatives. Sarah, sensing the volatile shift, finally pulled her arm from Mark's grasp, a subtle but significant movement. "Ethan, stop it," she exclaimed, her own voice rising, tinged with panic. "This isn't about him. This is about us. And I told you I'm sorry. I couldn't keep living a lie." She took a step forward, her expression a mix of apology and stubborn defiance, as if her confession alone was enough to absolve her. Her eyes, still guarded, pleaded for understanding, but it was lost in the wreckage of her deceit. "A lie?" My voice dropped, becoming a dangerous whisper again, far more chilling than my previous outburst. "Our entire marriage was a lie, Sarah. 7 years? Was every touch, every word, every plan, all of it a performance for your convenience?" I advanced a step, narrowing the distance between us, forcing her to truly meet my gaze. "Look me in the eye, Sarah, and tell me. Are you choosing him? Here. Now. Are you walking away from me, from us, for good?" The question hung in the air, a desperate ultimatum, a final chance for her to prove that some part of our history still mattered. The room held its breath, waiting for her answer. Sarah's eyes, still trying to hold my gaze, wavered. The silence in the room stretched, thin and brittle, taut with the collective anticipation of an answer that felt impossible. Her lips parted, then closed, as if the words themselves were lodged in her throat. Mark, sensing a moment of weakness, stepped forward slightly, his hand reaching for her arm again, a silent reminder of his presence, his claim. But this time, Sarah recoiled, a subtle, almost imperceptible jerk away from his touch. It was a flicker, a small signal, but my heart, dormant for what felt like an eternity, stirred with a faint, unfamiliar tremor. The relatives shifted in their seats, their whispers dying down completely, replaced by a tense, focused stillness. Every eye was on Sarah, waiting for the verdict that would either shatter my world irrevocably or perhaps rearrange its fractured pieces. The air conditioning hummed, a monotonous backdrop to the silent scream building inside me. "Ethan." Her voice was a fragile whisper, laced with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Not defiance, not apology, but something raw and exposed. She looked at me, truly looked at me this time, and I saw a flash of the Sarah I knew, the Sarah who used to curl up against me on cold nights, the Sarah whose laughter filled our home. It was fleeting, a ghost of memory, but it was there. Mark's face, which had been so smug, now tightened, a flicker of concern replacing his confident smirk. He seemed to recognize the shift too, the precarious balance of the moment tilting away from his favor. The very atmosphere seemed to vibrate with unspoken questions, with decades of family history hanging in the balance. Then she took a breath, a deep, shuddering intake of air that seemed to inflate her resolve. Her gaze locked onto mine, unwavering, and the next words she spoke were not the ones any of us expected. "No, Ethan," she said, her voice growing stronger, clearer, though still tinged with a profound sadness. "No, I'm not walking away from you. Not for good." A gasp, loud and collective, erupted from the assembled relatives. Aunt Carol actually clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Mr. Thompson, the lawyer, gaped, his glasses slipping down his nose. Mark, beside Sarah, stiffened, his jaw clenching, his eyes narrowing to angry slits. My own mind struggled to process her words. They spun in my head, disconnected and absurd, yet undeniably real. Not walking away from you, not for good. Hope, like a phoenix, rose from the ashes of my despair, tentative and fragile, almost afraid to believe. But it was there, a warmth spreading through the ice that had encased my chest. What are you saying, Sarah? I managed, the question more a plea for clarity than a demand. My eyes darted to Mark, whose face was now a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. His hand shot out, not to grasp Sarah, but to grab her wrist, his voice a low, dangerous growl. What are you doing? Sarah, you can't be serious. Mark's grip on her wrist was tight, almost painful, his face contorted with rage. After everything we've planned, everything we've shared, you're going to throw it all away for him? He tugged at her, trying to pull her closer to him, away from me, away from the decision she had just uttered. The sudden physical confrontation shocked everyone. Sarah winced, but she didn't scream. Instead, a new light entered her eyes, not defiance, but a steely resolve. It was the Sarah I remembered from our early days, fierce and unyielding when pushed too far. Let go of me, Mark, Sarah said, her voice cold, unwavering, utterly devoid of the warmth she'd shown him moments earlier. She pulled her wrist free from his grasp, a sharp, decisive motion that left him reeling back a step. Her gaze, still fixed on me, now carried a profound regret, an acknowledgement of the pain she had caused, but also an undeniable truth. This has been a mistake, Ethan. All of it. She glanced at Mark, a quick, dismissive look that cut deeper than any words. I convinced myself I was unhappy, convinced myself that this was what I needed. But seeing you, seeing the devastation in your eyes, it stripped away all the lies I'd been telling myself. Mark stared at her, stunned, his expensive suit suddenly seeming less impressive, his slicked back hair slightly askew. A mistake? Sarah, we were going to build a life together. You told me you loved me. His voice was a desperate, bewildered cry, entirely stripped of its earlier arrogance. The relatives watched, rapt, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning understanding. My own heart pounded, a chaotic drumbeat against my ribs. A mistake? Could it really be? Could this nightmare be unraveling in a way I never, ever imagined? I did love you, Mark, Sarah admitted, her voice softer now, tinged with a weariness that spoke of a deep inner conflict finally resolved. She still hadn't taken her eyes off me, or at least I thought I did, but it wasn't real. Not in the way that this is real. Her hand, which had been hanging loosely at her side, slowly lifted, extending towards me. It was an invitation, a silent plea, and my breath hitched in my throat. The room seemed to fade, the family, Mark, the lawyer, all of it receding into a blurry background. There was only Sarah, her extended hand, and the fragile, unbelievable possibility of a second chance. Ethan, she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. I came here today thinking I was ready to leave you, thinking I wanted a fresh start. But the moment I walked through that door, the moment I saw your face, I knew. I knew I'd made a terrible, terrible mistake. I don't want a life without you. Her eyes welled up finally, with the tears I hadn't seen earlier, the tears that now mirrored the ones pricking at my own eyes. It wasn't just words. It was the raw, undeniable emotion pouring from her, a sudden, profound vulnerability that shattered her earlier composure. My hand, still clenched in a useless fist, slowly, almost hesitantly, began to uncurl. My hand, still clenched in a useless fist, slowly, almost hesitantly, began to uncurl. It felt alien, stiff with a grief that hadn't yet fully released its grip. Sarah's tears, glistening in the sterile office light, were a torrent washing away the carefully constructed facade she'd worn for so long. Her vulnerability was disarming, a fragile bridge appearing across the chasm that had opened between us. The sight of her, truly broken and remorseful, pierced through the layers of pain and anger I'd accumulated. It was the Sarah I knew, stripped bare of artifice, pleading not just for forgiveness, but for a lifeline. Sarah. My voice was still a strained whisper, barely there, but infused with a desperate longing I hadn't known I still possessed. My fingers, now fully open, twitched, wanting to reach for her, yet held back by the lingering sting of betrayal. Could I trust this? Was this another illusion or a genuine turning point? The silent battle raged within me, a furious clash between instinct and profound hurt. Mark, watching our exchange with an increasingly desperate look, took another step forward, his own hand reaching out, not for Sarah, but as if to tear us apart. Sarah, don't be ridiculous. Mark's voice was a desperate snarl, stripped of its former charm, revealing the raw panic beneath. This is a mistake. He'll never forgive you. This is what we built, remember? Our future. He was appealing to her, not with love, but with a desperate, wounded pride. His words, instead of pulling her back to him, seemed to solidify Sarah's resolve. Her gaze, still locked on mine, hardened ever so slightly as she turned her head just enough to dismiss him with a look. Our future, Mark, she stated, her voice clear and strong, cutting through his desperation like a knife, was built on a fantasy, a delusion. It wasn't real. Then her eyes returned to me, filled with a sorrow so deep it seemed to consume her. Ethan, please. I know I don't deserve it. I know I've shattered everything. But please, just don't give up on us. Don't give up on me. Her hand remained extended, trembling slightly, an offering of what little she had left. The raw honesty in her voice, coupled with the profound vulnerability in her eyes, finally broke through the final barricade of my pain. It was a leap of faith, a desperate grab for a love I thought was irrevocably lost. My uncurled hand, no longer hesitant, surged forward, closing around hers. Her fingers, cool and slender, interlaced with mine, a familiar warmth spreading through my palm. It was an electric touch, a circuit completing, and in that instant, the world stopped spinning. A collective sigh seemed to ripple through the room. Aunt Carol buried her face in Aunt Mildred's shoulder, a mix of relief and lingering shock. Mr. Thompson, the lawyer, let out a shaky breath, slumping slightly in his chair as if a great weight had been lifted. But all I saw was Sarah, her hand in mine, her tear-streaked face now etched with a fragile hope, a reflection of the tumultuous emotion in my own chest. Mark, witnessing our hands connect, let out a choked sound, a mixture of rage and defeat. He stared at us, his face contorted with disbelief, his carefully crafted composure completely shattered. He looked from Sarah to me, then back to Sarah, his eyes burning with a hatred that could almost be felt. You'll regret this, Sarah, he spat, his voice hoarse with fury. Both of you, this is over. He turned abruptly, a violent pivot, and stormed towards the heavy oak door, throwing it open with a crash that echoed through the stunned silence. The sudden, jarring sound of the door slamming shut after him reverberated, a final, emphatic punctuation mark to the dramatic exit. With Mark gone, the oppressive tension in the room, which had been thick enough to cut, dissipated instantly, replaced by a stunned, fragile silence. The relatives, who had been holding their breaths, now exhaled, a collective murmur rising as they processed the unbelievable turn of events. But I didn't hear them. My gaze was fixed on Sarah, my thumb gently tracing the back of her hand, a silent question in the gesture. Her eyes, still brimming with tears, finally softened, a glimmer of the familiar warmth I cherished returning to them. Ethan, she whispered again, her voice still hoarse, but laced with a tenderness that stirred something deep inside me. I'm so sorry. I let myself get lost. I let myself believe a lie. The words were simple, yet carried the weight of everything that had transpired. My own throat tightened, a lump forming, but it was no longer from pain, but from a dizzying mix of relief and overwhelming emotion. This was real. She had chosen me. A profound quiet descended upon the room, a stark contrast to the storm that had just raged. The air, previously charged with fury and betrayal, now felt thick with an awkward, expectant silence. My eyes, still locked with Sarah's, were a blurry landscape of her tear-streaked face, her lips parted slightly, ready to speak. The lump in my throat remained, a testament to the roller coaster of emotions that had just consumed me. Her hand, still clasped in mine, felt warm, solid, real. It was a lifeline, but also a fragile anchor in a sea of uncertainty. Mr. Thompson, ever the professional, though visibly shaken, finally cleared his throat, a hesitant, almost apologetic sound. "Well then," he began, his voice surprisingly steady, "I suppose, now that the private matters have been addressed, we can perhaps resume the reading of Mr. Richard's will." He looked from us to the other relatives, whose faces were still a tableau of stunned disbelief, some still whispering behind cupped hands. The absurdity of returning to the mundane details of an inheritance after such a visceral display of human drama was almost comical, yet it was a necessary return to some semblance of order. Sarah squeezed my hand lightly, a silent acknowledgement of the public spectacle we'd just created. She didn't look at the other relatives. Her focus remained solely on me. "Ethan," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "We need to talk. Properly. Not here." Her eyes, though still red-rimmed, held a quiet urgency. A desperate need for us to escape the prying eyes and suffocating judgment of the room. I nodded, a silent agreement that transcended words. The will no longer mattered. Nothing did, except the woman standing before me, whose choice had just rewritten the entire narrative of my life. "Yes," I managed, my voice still a little raw. "Later, we'll go home." Home. The word felt loaded, heavy with the weight of shattered trust and the daunting task of rebuilding. I looked around the room then, meeting the gazes of Aunt Carol, who offered a watery, sympathetic smile, and Aunt Mildred, whose expression was unreadable, a mixture of disapproval and something akin to relief. The sheer audacity of what had just transpired would be the subject of family gossip for years, a story whispered over holiday dinners. Sarah finally pulled her hand from mine, but only to slip her arm through mine, a familiar gesture that nonetheless felt entirely new. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice regaining a hint of its usual clarity. "We'll be leaving now. Please continue without us." Her words were polite but firm, an unspoken demand for privacy. The lawyer nodded, looking genuinely relieved to be rid of the central figures in this unexpected drama. The other relatives seemed to part like the Red Sea, creating an unspoken path for us to exit. As we walked towards the heavy oak door, the same door Mark had stormed out of moments before, I could feel the lingering stares, the silent questions, the unspoken judgments. But I also felt something else, a fragile thread of connection re-establishing itself between Sarah and me. Her steps were tentative, almost apologetic, yet she leaned into me slightly, a silent confession of vulnerability. It was a long walk, each step a conscious effort, navigating not just the physical space, but the emotional minefield we had just endured. Once outside the office, the bright, indifferent hallway lights felt blinding after the subdued atmosphere of the room. The air was cool, carrying the faint metallic scent of the building's old pipes. Sarah stopped, pulling her arm from mine and turning to face me fully. Her eyes searched mine, raw and exposed. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I made such a mess. I was so lost. Can you ever forgive me?" Her plea was desperate, laced with a genuine self-loathing that mirrored the pain she had inflicted. I looked at her, truly looked at her. The woman I had married, the woman I had loved with every fiber of my being, stood before me, broken and vulnerable. The anger, the rage, the crushing sense of betrayal, still lingered, a dull ache beneath the surface. But seeing her like this, stripped of all artifice, acknowledging the magnitude of her mistake, something shifted within me. It wasn't forgiveness yet, not fully, but it was the fragile seed of possibility. "I don't know, Sarah," I admitted, my voice hoarse, honest. "It's a lot. You broke my world, Sarah. You really did." My gaze swept over her face, lingering on the tear tracks, the slight tremor in her lips. "But you came back. You chose me." "Why?" Why now? What changed? The questions tumbled out not as accusations, but as a desperate need for understanding. The weight of her betrayal was immense, but the weight of her choice, in that moment, felt equally so. The path ahead was unknown, shrouded in the aftermath of her confession, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could see a faint glimmer of a path at all. Why now? What changed? My words hung in the cool hallway air, a desperate plea for a logic I couldn't yet grasp. Sarah's eyes, still red-rimmed, held my gaze, and I saw her searching for the right words, for a way to explain the incomprehensible. She took a shuddering breath, her shoulders slumping slightly as if shedding an invisible weight. The faint scent of stale office coffee clung to her, a phantom of the betrayal we'd just endured. "Ethan," she began, her voice soft, almost fragile. "It's hard to explain. For months I was lost. I convinced myself I was unhappy, that we were unhappy. Mark was charming, he flattered me, he made me feel seen, in a way I felt was missing. It was an escape, a fantasy I allowed myself to believe. I built this whole narrative in my head, a justification for everything." She paused, her gaze dropping to our intertwined hands. "But then, walking into that room, seeing you, seeing the pain on your face, the humiliation, the sheer public brokenness of everything, it wasn't an escape anymore. It was real, and it was devastating." She looked up at me again, her eyes glistening. "Seeing you, Ethan, not the idealized husband I was trying to escape, but the real, hurt man I swore to cherish. It just shattered the illusion. Mark's words, his arrogance, it all sounded hollow and pathetic in the face of your genuine agony. In that moment, watching you struggle to breathe, to even speak, I realized what I was throwing away. It wasn't just a marriage, it was us. It was a connection that ran deeper than any fleeting infatuation, a history that wasn't perfect, but was profoundly real." Her grip on my hand tightened, a desperate anchor. "I saw how you looked at me, Ethan," she continued, her voice gaining a quiet intensity. "Not with anger or judgment, not solely, but with a plea. A desperate plea for me to remember who we were. And I did. I remembered our first apartment, the way we laughed until our sides hurt, the promises we made. It all came crashing back, and I knew unequivocally that walking away from you would be the biggest mistake of my life. That Mark, he was never the answer. He was just a symptom of my own confusion." The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered, each one a painful stitch in the torn fabric of our reality. I listened, my mind a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. Her honesty, her raw vulnerability, was both a balm and a fresh wound. It didn't erase the betrayal, but it offered a glimpse into the labyrinth of her confusion, a desperate attempt to explain the inexplicable. The anger still simmered, a low, persistent hum beneath the fragile hope, but a new understanding was beginning to emerge, like faint light breaking through heavy clouds. The questions I had harbored for months, the silent doubts about her distance, were finally being answered, even if the answers were agonizing. "It doesn't make it easy, Sarah," I finally said, my voice still hoarse, a mirror of the difficulty within me. "It doesn't just disappear. The pain, the trust." My fingers traced the delicate veins on the back of her hand, a gesture of lingering tenderness mixed with profound uncertainty. "It's going to take time, a lot of time, and work. More work than we've ever put into anything before." Her eyes were still fixed on mine, soaking in every word, every hesitant admission. A single tear escaped her eye, tracing a path down her cheek. But this time it wasn't a tear of shame or panic, but of a quiet, profound understanding. "I know, Ethan. I don't expect it to be easy. I don't deserve easy. But I'm ready. I'm ready to do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes, to earn back your trust, to remind you of the Sarah you fell in love with." Her voice, though still soft, carried a new conviction, a determined strength that had been absent moments before. We stood there in the bright hallway, suspended in time, oblivious to the muffled sounds of the world behind the closed office door. to the hushed conversations of family members who would forever tell the story of what happened at Uncle Richard's will reading. Her hand in mine, a fragile bridge over shattered promises, became the focal point of my universe. The harsh fluorescent lights above cast long shadows around us, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a sliver of light, pure and untainted, pierced through the darkness of my despair, illuminating the daunting, yet undeniably hopeful path ahead. The silence that settled between us wasn't awkward, but deep and resonant, holding the weight of 7 years, of crushing betrayal, and of an improbable second chance. It was the silence of two souls on the brink of rediscovering each other, of facing a future forged not from fantasy, but from the searing honesty of raw pain and brave confession. We simply stood, breathing in unison, the soft rhythm of our breaths, a quiet promise echoing in the empty hall. Her hand, still nestled within mine, became a striking image, a single intertwined hope against the vast, indifferent backdrop of the world outside. The office building hummed faintly around us, a distant, fading presence, its legal dramas and family squabbles receding into insignificance. All that remained was the quiet strength of her unexpected choice, a whisper of a universal insight. That sometimes the most profound truths are revealed not in grand declarations, but in the raw, messy courage to face the damage we've done, and the unlikely strength to choose love, even when it feels irrevocably broken.